Hey everybody, this video is called Two Kings, No Peace. And tonight we're going to continue our pass-through study that we just opened yesterday in the book of 2 Samuel, where we're going to be looking at two separate kings and the conflict that's taken place. And so 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1 through 3, it says, "It happened after this that David inquired of the Lord, saying, Shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah? And the Lord said to him, Go up. David said, Where shall I go up? And he said, To Hebron. So David went up there, and his two wives also, Ahinoam the Jezreelitess, and Abigail the widow of Nabal the Carmelite. And David brought up the men who were with him, every man in his household. So they dwelt in the cities of Hebron." So we see what's taking place is that David sought guidance from the Lord as to where to start his reign. And we see that David first inquires of the Lord about the area of Judah. And Hebron had the highest elevation of any town within Judah. It is the initial location that we find where David brings his rule over Israel. And it was approximately 20 miles southwest of Jerusalem. And back in the book of Genesis 13:18, Abraham had located there long before. So this wasn't just something new of a location. And as we studied back in the month of June, Hebron had been given to Caleb in Joshua chapter 14, verse 13 through 14, when Israel occupied the land after the wilderness wanderings. And Abigail, if you were with me back in 1 Samuel 25, verse 40 through 44, we know that she became David's wife after the death of her husband Nabal. And so verse 4 through 7 says, "Then the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying, The men of Jabesh Gilead were the ones who buried Saul. So David sent messengers to the men of Jabesh Gilead and said to them, You are blessed of the Lord, for you have shown this kindness to your Lord, to Saul, and have buried him. And now may the Lord show kindness and truth to you. I also will repay you this kindness, because you have done this thing. Now therefore let your hands be strengthened and valiant, for your master Saul is dead, and also the house of Judah has anointed me king over them." And so David had already privately anointed king to Samuel by Samuel in 1 Samuel 16, verse 3. And this anointing, it recognized his rule in the southern area of Judah. And later, he would be anointed, as we're going to see, as king over all of Israel, as we'll see next week. In Jabesh Gilead, the city of Israel that was east of the Jordan, it demonstrated its loyalty to Saul by giving him a proper burial. And David referred to Saul as your master, and that wasn't so much to antagonize the men of Jabesh Gilead. He sought to win Israel over to his side and not force them into submission. In verse 8 through 11 says, "But Abner, the son of Ner, commander of Saul's army, took Ishbosheth, the son of Saul, and brought him over to Mahanaim. And he made him king over Gilead, over the Ashurites, over Jezreel, over Ephraim, over Benjamin, and over all Israel. Ishbosheth, Saul's son, was 40 years old when he began to reign over Israel. And he reigned 2 years. Only the house of Judah followed David. And the time that David was king in Hebron over the house of Judah was 7 years and 6 months." And so verses 8 through 11, we see Saul's cousin Abner did not desire to follow the new Lord's anointed king, but he placed Ishbosheth on the throne, and that is what brings the tension between Judah and the rest of the tribes of Israel. And Saul's only surviving son was placed as king over the northern tribes of Israel and the eastern ones across the Jordan. And Mahanaim is a town in Gilead to the east of the Jordan River. And that's where Ishbosheth established himself there to reign for 2 years. And back in the book of Genesis 32, verse 2, Jacob saw the angels while on his way to Penuel. And in Joshua 21, verse 28, it was appointed to a Levitical city from the territory of Gad. And in chapter 17 and 19, it became a clear haven for David while fleeing from Absalom, because it was likely as well fortified. And Ishbosheth's power came more solidified in the land of Gilead than the rest of Israel. And a natural opposition arose between the tribe of Israel and the remainder of the tribes, since Judah was under the reign of David, while Ishbosheth was the king over the remaining parts of the tribes. And so several years passed before Ishbosheth assumed the throne of Israel, so that Ishbosheth's second year reign came at the end of David's 7.5-year reign over Judah. And it must have taken Ishbosheth about 5 years to regain the northern territory from the Philistines. In verse 12 through 17 says, Now Abner the son of Ner and the servants of Ishbosheth the son of Saul went out from Mahanaim to Gibeon, and Joab the son of Zeruiah and the servants of David went out and met them by the pool of Gibeon. So they sat down on one side of the pool and the other on the other side of the pool. Then Abner said to Joab, Let the young men now arise and compete before us. And Joab said, Let them arise. So they arose and went over by number 12 from Benjamin, followers of Ishbosheth the son of Saul, and 12 from the servants of David. And each one grasped his opponent by the head and thrust his sword in the opponent's side. So they fell down together. Therefore that place was called the field of sharp swords, which is in Gibeon. So there was a fierce battle that day, and Abner and the men of Israel were beaten before the servants of David. So during the time of Joshua, Gibeon was seen as a very important city, and its people probably had sided with David because Saul had broken the treaty with the Gibeonites and acted treacherously toward them. And Joab was the leader of David's army, and therefore he led the men against Abner. And although Ishbosheth and David sat on their thrones of their respective territories, Joab and Abner truly had wielded the power and control by leading the military forces. And Zeruiah was the sister of David, as you can find later in the book of 1 Chronicles 2:16. And rather than having an all-out war here, Abner proposed a representative contest between the champions on behalf of the opposing armies. And because all 24 of the contestants lay fallen and dying in combat, the contest settled nothing but excited the passions, so that a battle between the two armies ensued. In verse 18 through 23 says, Now the three sons of Zeruiah were there, Joab and Abishai and Asahel. And Asahel was as fleet of foot as a wild gazelle. And Asahel pursued Abner, and in going he did not turn to the right hand or to the left from following Abner. Then Abner looked behind him and said, Are you Asahel? He answered, I am. And Abner said to him, Turn aside to your right hand or to your left, and lay hold on one of the young men and take the armor for yourself. But Asahel would not turn aside from following him. In verse 22, so Abner said again to Asahel, turn aside from following me. Why should I strike you to the ground? How then can I face your brother Joab? However, he refused to turn aside. Therefore Abner struck him in the stomach with a blunt end of the spear, so that the spear came out of his back, and he fell down there and died on the spot. And so it was that as many as came to the place where Asahel fell down and died stood still. And so Abishai was the brother of Joab, who was an aide to David throughout his rise to power. And he was with David in the camp of Saul when David had opportunity to kill Saul and encourage the murder of Saul, which David in 1 Samuel 26 verse 6 through 9. And Asahel was another brother of Joab, who was a single-minded with dogged determination. Though he was extremely fleet-footed, his determination would prove to be fatal. And to gain the armor of the enemy general, Abner, who was fleeing from the defeat, would be to possess the greatest trophy. And Asahel was ambitious to get it, while Abner went on to keep warning him, suggesting that he take the armor of some other soldier for his trophy, since he would not be able to defeat Abner. And Abner sought to spare Asahel so as to avoid unnecessary vengeance from Joab or David. And Abner tried to give Asahel reasons to stop his pursuit, but Asahel was determined in his own heart to get what he wanted. And Abner didn't wish to strike down Asahel, but Asahel refused to listen, so he was forced to be stopped his effort with a fatal stab with the blunt end of the spear. In verse 24 through 28 says, Joab and Abishai also pursued Abner, and the sun was going down when they came to the hill of Ammah, which is before Giah, by the road of the wilderness of Gibeon. Now the children of Benjamin gathered together behind Abner and became a unit, and took their stand on top of a hill. Then Abner called to Joab and said, shall the sword devour forever? Do you know that it will be bitter in the latter end? How long will it then until you tell the people to return from pursuing their brethren? And Joab said, as God lives, unless you have spoken surely, since by morning all the people would have given up pursuing their brethren. So Joab blew a trumpet, and all the people stood still and did not pursue Israel any more, nor did they fight any more. And so now, more than just the cause of David motivated them, they wanted to avenge the killing of their brother Asahel. And as Abner had earlier proposed that the hostilities begin, he now proposed that they come to a cease. And Joab agreed to the ceasefire, most likely to protect the rest of his burnt-out army and to avoid a long, bloody, unproductive civil war. In verse 29 through 32 says, then Abner and his men went on all that night through the plain, crossed over the Jordan, and went to all Bethron. And they came to Mahanaim. So Joab returned from pursuing Abner, and when he had gathered all the people together, they were missing David's servants, 19 men in Asahel. But the servants of David had struck down of Benjamin and Abner's men, 360 men who died. Then they took up Asahel and buried him in his father's tomb, which was in Bethlehem. And Joab and his men went all night, and they came to Hebron at daybreak. And if you don't mind, I just want to read into the first verse of chapter 3. And you might think it's a weird spot to end a study, but if you know the format of the Bible, there was not chapters and verses originally. That was something that was broken down as the Bible was translated into different, languages like what we have through the Geneva, so on. So verse 1, chapter 3 says, "Now there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, but David grew stronger and stronger, and the house of Saul grew weaker and weaker." So after the death of Asahel, Abner moved through this gorge as he approached Mahanaim, and the conflict between Ishbosheth and David did not end in a quick victory. And there was a gradual transfer of power from the house of Saul to the house of David that lasted at least through the 2-year reign of Ishbosheth, and maybe even longer. And so to wrap up this chapter today, it might not be the most entertaining to you, it might not be the most comforting or encouraging to you, but we look at the 2 kings over the people of God. We had King David, the king of Judah, and then he gave thanks for the men of Jabesh Gilead. And then we look at the other king over the rest of the tribes of Israel, King Ishbosheth, who was appointed by Abner. And we look at the war between the tribe of Judah and the other tribes of Israel, and Abner's troops and Joab's troops as they squared off and fiercely battled. And we saw that Abner killed Asahel. And then we see that there was a ceasefire that was called for, and it was a great victory for David's army. And while these next few chapters are not going to be the most comforting to you, you're going to probably see them as violent. And this is where people don't like the Old Testament because of, war and battles and all that stuff. What we must not miss focus on here is that in the midst of men's wickedness, we see that God is at work, and God is preparing the way for the Messiah to come through the lineage of David. And Jesus came through the Davidic line, the David family. And Jesus, unlike the kings that you're going to read in the Old Testament, Jesus is King of kings and Lord of lords forevermore. And that's going to wrap up today's video, as we're going to look next at Abner's defection and murder tomorrow night. So I hope you have a great rest of your evening. God bless, and we'll see you later.